Hi guys. So today we are going to talk about origins of life in our video notes. Okay. Okay, so hopefully that's all set up and you're seeing it and we're not running into the problem we had on that other video. Okay, so when we're talking about origins of life, we have to think back to, based on how we can date the geological record, that the Earth appears to have formed approximately 4.6 billion years ago, BYA. So the early Earth was not suitable for life until about 3.9 billion years ago. So it was still so harsh an environment that there was no way that a living thing could exist on it at that time. So the earliest fossils we find are about 3.5 billion years ago. And when we talk about earliest fossils, remember, these are the things that are recorded. Is there a possibility that there were things somewhere earlier than 3.5, but later than 3.9? Yes, because not everything turns into fossils. The fossils that we found, though, however, are cyanobacteria. So we're talking about a very simplistic living thing. So this brings us to the question of, how did life arise? Now, remember, we weren't there. We don't know. These are all theories based on some sort of evidence that we provide, because remember, scientific theories are supported by research and evidence and things like that. So it's not just a guess. So we know, based on the studying the rocks, that the early Earth contained inorganic molecules. One thought is that these could have synthesized the organic molecules due to the free energy and abundant oxygen. Those organic molecules could also have been transported via meteorites or some other celestial event. So that's another theory as to how it may have occurred. So let's look at these a little bit. So first, we're going to look at the experimental data. Oparin and Haldane hypothesized, so they came up with this idea, that early Earth was primarily composed of hydrogen, methane, ammonia, and water. So those four specific substances. Stanley Miller and Harold Urey actually tested Oparin and Haldane's hypothesis. So a lot of times this will be referred to as the Miller-Urey experiment. But realize that they're actually the ones who were testing someone else's theoretical idea. And what they found when they put these substances with the electrical spark to represent lightning into a closed system with all of the characteristics, the heat, the water from the ocean, all of the characteristics that would be found, they actually did form organic compounds and amino acids in this situation, in this closed system. So obviously those organic compounds had to be created based on the materials, because they weren't in there before they started the experiment, and as it's a closed system, that means they had to have been created. So that suggests that it is possible that basic organic compounds were created and over time would join into more and more complex. So Miller and Urey then hypothesized that organic molecules that formed served as the building blocks for the macromolecules we deal with today. So the idea is, we made these initial ones and then they built upon each other and they built upon each other. So another hypothesis that's presented is called the RNA world hypothesis. This proposes that RNA actually could have been the earliest genetic material rather than DNA. If you think about it, that kind of makes sense because RNA is single-stranded. It's obviously more simplistic. And it also helps to explain those pre-cellular stages of life when we didn't have to have the complex system on how to make copies of the DNA and turn them into RNA and go through all those steps. So I want you to think back to when we actually covered the endosymbiont theory, and we talked about it in cells and we talked about it in photosynthesis, cellular reproduction. What was that theory? How does it relate to this idea of topics of the origin of life? And so if you think back, that whole endosymbiont theory was how we thought that the chloroplast and the mitochondria in particular came to be within the cells, that they were actually free living and were engulfed and then began to work in a symbiotic relationship. Well, this kind of fits with these ideas that we were just talking about, where we had these smaller substances and they start building upon each other and working together and joining together to form what we recognize nowadays as life. Same kind of process is what's based in that idea of the endosymbiont theory. So that's just kind of a big picture of the main theories that we have for the origins of life. Hopefully, that gives you a little bit to go on. And I will see you in the next lesson. Bye.